Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading for Monday, October 18th, 2021. I missed Friday again, but I have a better excuse than I did the last few months. Basically, on Friday, I had no voice, or very little of one. I have more of one right now, but I'm filming this at night and it's kind of going again. I think I should be quick here because I'm just slowly starting to get back into the land of the living. For the much of last week, in fact, I took time off of work because I had cold symptoms. I believe I caught a cold on a vacation I took last weekend. And my workplace, because I work in person, is really starting to lay down the law. They really don't want anyone to come in who's sick at all. You know, not only spreading COVID, but just spreading anything is something they don't really want to have to deal with. And so I was concerned because I'd had minor symptoms that came and went, and then I started to lose my voice. And so the brief amount of time I went to work quickly came to an end. And I, in fact, went to go get a COVID test just to make sure, because, you know, you never know you don't know for sure what these symptoms are in today's world, and luckily my test came back negative. But still have to deal with a cold, even a mild one, but, you know, what can you do? But hopefully I'm at the beginning of a fresh new week where things will only get better from here, going from very much mostly okay, very much mostly, to officially totally okay. We'll see. But that's not what I came here to ramble on about. I came to talk at least briefly about books. Books and stories that I've read this week, starting with my latest in this collection of Dorothy Parker short stories, which I've been eking through slowly for the past few months. The one I've read for this video was an interesting one. It's called The Garter. It was published in 1928. A garter, in my understanding, was a torture device that women had to wear in yesteryear's fashion. And in this dashed-off story, Dorothy Parker is in the first-person POV of a character at a party, and her garter breaks. And that means that she can't really stand up or move around without, like, her whole ensemble sort of coming apart, like, you know, the emperor with no clothes in a way. So she's sitting there at her seat and becoming more and more hyperbolic about what she can't do because she's in the middle of a popular event. And she starts to talk about maybe she'll be Mrs. Havisham, you know, from Dickens, and Great Expectations, like, you know, the decrepit old woman in the decrepit old house who can never move because of this garter. And then things take a more interesting turn even with this set of lines. "Oh, have you met Dorothy Parker? What's she like? Oh, she's terrible. God, she's poisonous. Sits in a corner and sulks all evening. Never opens her yap. Dumbest woman you ever saw in your life. You know, they say she doesn't even write a word of her own stuff. They say she pays this poor little guy who lives in some tenement on the Lower East Side $10 a week to write it, and then she just signs her name on it. He has to do it, the poor devil, to help support a crippled mother and 5 brothers and sisters. He makes buttonholes in the daytime. Oh, she's terrible." So suddenly the breaking of the garter feels like a metaphor for the breaking of the fourth wall, with Dorothy Parker being the narrator who's talking to us in this story. And I guess this seems a little bit defensive to me in a way. I guess, I mean, when you get to those lines, this seems to be a criticism that might be, you know, lobbed at her at this point in her career, perhaps, that, you know, so many of her stories are these dashed-off observations at parties, so who knows, maybe she is just taking gossipy dictation. I kind of thought that sometimes even. I think I've made that a little bit of my critique. So yeah, maybe this is some sort of response to that criticism, or some sort of defensiveness, I suppose, along those lines. It's certainly interesting, but it doesn't grab me as much as, I guess, her normal dashed off stories that are a little more traditional in terms of a narrative. So, but yeah, it's a new direction, and we'll see maybe if these stories might start to evolve a little. We'll see. Okay, well, the book I finished this week is All the King's Traitors by Keylin Rivers, which is my very belated booktube spin number 2 that I was supposed to have read last quarter. Now I can move into booktube spin number 3 in coming months. Not this month, but anyway, this is an epic fantasy story, the start of a series, technically speaking, written by an author tuber, Keylin Rivers, self-published. Very excited to give a platform to, a fellow author tuber, and I very much enjoyed her book. I thought that, we're following several characters in her epic fantasy land who are on their sort of own personal quests. They live in a world, Azanthia, which seems to me like, post-apocalyptic Earth. Like I was thinking of the Shannara Chronicles or the Wheel of Time, although technically I haven't really read those works. I'm just kind of going off of what I've watched in adaptations for both of them. But it's certainly what is happening here is that it seems like we are in a far future society, and Earth and our society has broken down, and our descendants live a more agrarian lifestyle, but there's magic too that comes in the form of these godstones that you can pull out of the earth, or sometimes come in lightning storms from the skies. And when somebody picks up a godstone, they become a wielder who has an elemental power. And anyway, in this epic kingdom called Azanthia, they're ruled over by the god king called Apollyon, who's made himself very scarce. He rules by fear and intimidation, it seems like, from a distance. And a couple of the narrators are two foster brothers who are basically running away from unjust conscription. Another narrator is actually a blood descendant of his. He's lived more than a mortal life because of his godstone. And she is put through a grueling trial to sort of take over the position of heir from yet another POV who decides to leave Apollyon's service, and he decides, this is not the only god. We are all gods if we wield godstones. So yeah, civil war is brewing. We have some, Apollyon tries to very much tightly control other wielders and put them into a military system from Azanthia. And there's also in the background a nice world building with, by way of like a faction of the kingdom in the north that is in rebellion, and the reasoning for that. And then there's free wielders who want to, exist and wield their godstones without Apollyon's, iron-fisted control. So yeah, there's a lot of great, interesting world building going on, and compelling characters. I did feel like some of the writing was a little rough, a little exposition heavy. In my mind, I sort of put that in the mindset of I knew that it was self-published. I don't know, if I didn't know if this was self-published, if I would have, jumped to that conclusion or not, but I think I would have. Just the certain tenor of the writing felt a little more uneven than I'm used to from like the Big Five. That's my take of this, but that's not enough to keep me from being invested in the story. Although, unfortunately speaking, I'm not entirely sure if Keylin Rivers intends to go on with this story, even though it did very much end with a cliffhanger and a note in the back about staying tuned for the second book, and she missed the deadline that she put in this book about when her next book would be published. So there hasn't been much word about it since. This was published in 2019. So I guess in the back of my head I'll be hoping, and Goodreads maybe will hopefully tell me if this book is coming out, or I'll find out through the AuthorTube community if I can continue the series, because I do think it's a compelling series. I think in terms of the characters and the story, it stands up to any other fantasy. So I will continue with it if I can, and if not, as I wrote on my Goodreads review, there's plenty of other epic fantasy fish in the sea. So there we go. Next, well, I'm very much embarrassed by this one. I'm still a little under halfway through Behold the Dreamers by Imbolo Mbue. This was something I picked up because it has been on my Goodreads TBR since 2016, and one of my annual goals is to clear my Goodreads TBR of books I put on there in 2016. Several months ago, I also had this as a contender for the page 112 tag, so I'm very excited that even though I didn't choose it then, I'm finally getting to it now. I'm not happy that I'm not finished with it yet, especially since I had all this time at home, though I guess in my defense I was sick, trying to get over some of that too. But it is a compelling story. I'm enjoying it. It takes place during the bust of 2008, and in fact one of the characters is employed by Lehman Brothers, which in the U.S. The economic crisis was started in part by Lehman Brothers, a corporation, kind of folding. Our main characters are a Cameroonian immigrant couple, Jende and Nenny, who work for this very rich American couple, the husband of which works at Lehman. Jende is Mr. Edwards's chauffeur, and Nenny occasionally does like housework for Mrs. Edwards along with other jobs. You know, it's the sort of story that could very easily be one-sided and like a critique of the vapid and selfish and greedy American rich couple and, you know, the poor, upright Cameroonian couple who work for them. But I think Mbue has a lot more empathy for all of her characters and makes them all into more flawed people. The Cameroonian couple is in some hot water and immigration, and part of that has to do with kind of lying to get where they are, especially in Jende's POV. I mean, I know my own personal politics are that immigration in America is way too strict, far stricter now than it was, say, when my own ancestors came over just a few generations ago. But at the same time, it is what it is, and technically speaking, life in Cameroon would have been far more difficult, but not like technically impossible for this couple. I guess I shouldn't say I technically think of that as 100% a flaw, or, you know, their more conservative social values in some cases as a flaw, but it brings texture to their characters. But they also feel, I think, a lot of affection for the Edwardses, even though the Edwardses often do come off as, you know, incredibly self-involved and living in a world that is so removed from certainly what their employees are going through. And they have a lot of drama going on in their professional and personal lives, but they also are not just, you know, trust fund babies who've had the world handed to them on a silver platter and are throwing tantrums when things don't go their way all the time. They both also struggled in their pasts over their own demons and to get where they are, and they are not necessarily people who are just, you know, evil to the core and in it only for themselves. They have some, you know, understanding of, you know, the rest of the world and how, you know, their influence in the rest of the world or in their own relationships or that sort of thing. So I feel like there is a lot of empathy for this couple, the Edwardses, who are going through a lot of personal and now professional strife as Lehman Brothers has now fallen, and that of course brings problems for Jende and Nenny, whose own employment might hang in the balance, and if they lose this employment it'll be very hard to, you know, get something similar or get something at all, because they have you know, their own issues with immigration that are coming up and visas, and Nenny is in fact pregnant and on a student visa, and is, you know, is sort of in a position of should her husband wants her to, you know, stay home, and but if she stays home, will she lose her visa? So there's a lot of kind of drama in this, but, you know, it's based in reality, you know, a real financial crisis and also the sorts of personal crises that, you know, poor immigrants like Jende and Nenny, and then very rich Americans like the Edwardses had to go through or have to go through in their marriages. So yeah, I am enjoying it. It is certainly not, you know, the Succession take, I guess, on the rich and famous. Thinking of Succession because that just started airing again on HBO and HBO Max, and it's a very enjoyable show, but basically you only watch it for the Schadenfreude of seeing horrible people in dramatic situations, and that's not what this is exactly, at least so far. We'll see how it goes, but so far I'm all in. The next book I am reading is an audiobook. I'm only a little over a third of the way through Cibola, Byrne by James S. A. Corey. This is the fourth Expanse book I'm listening to on Libby. It's been a while since I've listened to an Expanse book, but I'm back and I'm excited. And speaking of television, the trailer for the sixth and final season of The Expanse recently dropped, and I'm feeling very verklempt about it. And I'm also not sure entirely. It could be possible that I'll actually be reading or listening to that Expanse book before I watch the season, which will be a first for me. But we're not there yet. I guess I'll backtrack a bit to book 4, which of course provides complications in a review setting, because I have 3 books of backstory that, you might not know about if you haven't read The Expanse or, watched the show. But basically, The Expanse is a science fiction series. It takes place a couple hundred years in our future, by which point Earth has colonized Mars and the Belt, and it's a very scientifically accurate novel in terms of space travel, like there's no, warp drives or anything. And also living in space, like living in the belt with zero-G, changes your physiology, which I understand is how things would actually go. And the Belters, in fact, are very much an underclass and have the fewest rights. And, also, I guess since they look less human or less like Earthers and Martians now, there's that stigma against them. And there's other sort of Cold War politics between Earth and Mars with, again, the Belters sort of being crushed in the middle, except, now there's a lot of tension and upset among the Belters as well. And then thrown into that mix is this alien device called the protomolecule, which humans in the last 3 books have been tinkering with, much to bad effect, as often happens, because we don't know what we're doing, and we're just going to tinker with it anyway and see if we can turn it into a weapon, of course. But the protomolecule has its own plan, and it's opened up a ring into a new galaxy of habitable worlds, which really changes the playing field. Like, the people on Mars are trying to terraform Mars, and it's been their dream to terraform it, but now there's all these accessible, habitable planets that are already, fit for human habitation, we think, or they think. And so Mars actually, as a society, is in deep trouble. It's like starting to splinter off. But the main focus of this story is about one of the planets, Illis, which has been colonized by people who are refugees from a Belter situation from an earlier book. And then on top of that, there's a UN charter to sort of explore this world as well. So there's these competing land grabs, and there's a lot of lithium on this planet. People want to, mine for its wealth. So there's, these issues between these people. And in fact, the Belters, there's a faction of this Belter society that commits acts of terrorism against the UN corporation, to keep them off, because, they see the UN as, oppressing them and continuing to oppress them. And then the UN corporation then, feels attacked by that. So, one of the things I love about this is that I think the authors who comprise James S. A. Corey, they never write characters or political sides where things aren't complicated, where, like, everybody has a point of view that's legitimate, even if, in this case, for example, there's a terrorist faction of Belters, and then on the UN side there's this security man named Murtry who really is basically a maniac, a psychopath who gets control, who can use this situation to his own ends of committing horrible acts of violence himself. So there's that. So, people who do horrible things, but there's also on both sides legitimate grievances. And on top of that, we have the main characters, a multicultural ship of people we've been following, the Rossi ship, the Rocinante. They're sent as mediators because they've been heavily involved in all the politics of these books. And the main character, James Holden, is basically known for not being able to keep his mouth shut when he feels like something is wrong. So he's kind of a scapegoat, and he's kind of, I think, seen as someone who could help because he really is a mediator sort of personality. You know, he fits, I think, the themes of these books is that even though there's a lot of human strife, that the characters who James S.A. Corey follow as POVs always are people who, you know, are looking for some sort of reconciliation or who are empathetic in some way. So that's what's going on in this book. There's this, and on top of that, one of the reasons I should say Holden is there is that he's had a lot of dealings with the protomolecule, and there's protomolecule tech on this planet everyone else is kind of ignoring, and he's thinking, oh gosh, this could get really bad because it's gotten really bad in other books. So that's my ramble about it. You know, I watched the show first, and it's always interesting to read the book in comparison. There's some things I don't like as much. There's one character, a scientist, who I feel like is, I don't know, a little more two-dimensional. In her POV, it feels like she's a little kind of, has this crush on Holden that I feel, I don't know, it seems so like juvenile. I'm like, what's going on with that? I mean, I realize people get lonely and want relationships on these big, you know, missions. This is scientifically accurate, so everything takes a lot of time to get to. But it still seems a little juvenile on her part. I guess it's a very small quibble. There's another character, actually two characters who weren't on the show, but are characters from the books that were like briefly mentioned in other books and now have their own POV chapters and their own, you know, storylines in book 4. And that's been very interesting, especially with this character Basha, who's had a really tragic story in one of the earlier books where he lost his son and is trying with his family to start anew on this new planet. So yeah, I'm very much invested in all of this, and it is, I think, in a way, sort of a more visceral, personal book than the first 3 that were slightly more removed, in a way, in talking about these themes of science and political strife. And now it feels like it's more personal, it's more on the ground, no pun intended, which might be an interesting segue into the 5th book, because I know where that one's going as well, and things are only going to get even more personal and dramatic. And that's another thing I guess I kind of like more about the show. There's the other characters of the Rossi. I feel like they come off a little flat, because we only get things from James Holden's POV, and we don't get to hear from them themselves, and I feel like the actors in the show brought these characters to life in a way earlier than the books did, in a way, made them more three-dimensional a little earlier, and there were some choices on the show to give them a little bit more to do, I think, than they got to do in the books. So that it kind of feels like it's the Holden show with the Rossi here, which is a little unfortunate, but it works. He has an interesting story to follow. He's kind of our everyman in a way. I mean, he's has more going on too. I really like this series. So consider this, even though I'm only a third of the way through book 4, I definitely suggest and recommend reading it. And anyway, next on my docket in Elizabeth Gaskell Victober verse is this book, Cranford, because I'm trying to get through 3 of the books that she wrote in honor of reading a Victorian author for Victober, and particularly coming back to this one who I hadn't read since college and giving her another go as a different sort of reader in my booktube era of life. So I'll be checking back with my thoughts on this. I think I, in fact, will be making a video about the particular books I hope to be reading of hers this month. So that about covers it for me. I'll leave links to information of things I've rambled about down below, although I guess I should try to get off for now. I think I've rambled and used more of my voice than I hoped to. So my next video, in fact, I think will be one of my shorter ones. It'll be an AuthorTube video. I make one of those a month, speaking of Keylin Rivers and AuthorTube. I have an Author's Answer series that I take part in that was created by another author tuber, J.D. Archer. So anyway, stay tuned for that coming later in this week. In the meantime, I hope you are all happy and healthy and in full capacity of your voices. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.